The school jerk cornered the new black girl. Seconds later, he was flat on the floor. When Derek Mitchell hit the ground so hard that his varsity jacket made a slapping sound against the linoleum, the entire hallway went dead silent. And that's when everyone realized the new girl wasn't just another victim waiting to happen. Before we dive into how a 5'4" girl completely demolished the school's most feared bully, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up when it really counts. Now let me take you back to how this all began at Riverside High School. Chapter 1. The New Girl. Maya Johnson stepped through the glass doors of Riverside High on a crisp October morning, her military-issued duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and her chin held high, despite the knot forming in her stomach. This was her fourth school in 3 years, the price of being a military kid, but something about this place felt different. Maybe it was the way conversation stopped mid-sentence as she walked past, or how eyes followed her every movement, like she was some exotic specimen that had wandered into their carefully curated world. A Riverside High was the kind of school that appeared in movies about privileged teenagers. Pristine hallways lined with trophy cases, students wearing clothes that cost more than most families spent on groceries, and an underlying current of entitlement that seemed to pulse through the building like electricity. Maya had seen it all before, but never quite like this. The demographics here were stark. In a sea of blonde ponytails and designer backpacks, she stood out like a beacon. "Great, another diversity hire," she heard someone whisper as she approached her locker, though when she turned around, everyone suddenly became very interested in their phones. Maya had learned long ago not to let ignorant comments penetrate her armor, but that didn't mean they bounced off completely painlessly. Sarah Chen, a petite Asian girl with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, appeared beside Maya's locker like a guardian angel. "Don't mind them," she said quietly, organizing her art supplies. "Most of these kids have never left their zip code, let alone interacted with anyone who doesn't look exactly like them. I'm Sarah, by the way." "Maya," she replied, grateful for the friendly face. "Thanks for the heads up. Word of advice?" Sarah glanced around conspiratorially. "Stay away from Derek Mitchell. Tall guy, blonde hair, walks around like he owns the place, because honestly his family kind of does. His father sits on the school board, and Derek's been making life miserable for anyone who doesn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable since freshman year." As if summoned by their conversation, Derek Mitchell rounded the corner with his usual entourage of followers. He was everything Sarah had described and more, 6'2" of athletic arrogance, wrapped in a varsity football jacket, with the kind of confident smirk that suggested he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. His ice-blue eyes swept the hallway like a predator surveying his territory, and when they landed on Maya, his smile turned sharp. "Well, well," Derek said, his voice carrying that particular brand of fake friendliness that made Maya's skin crawl. "Looks like our little school is getting more colorful this year." His friends snickered at the thinly veiled insult, clearly well-versed in their leader's particular brand of cruelty. Maya closed her locker with deliberate calm and turned to face him fully. Years of moving from base to base had taught her to read people quickly, and everything about Derek Mitchell screamed, "bully who's never been checked." She'd encountered his type before, but something about his entitled swagger and the way his friends laughed at his pathetic joke made her jaw clench. "Is there something you need?" Maya asked, her voice steady and controlled. She could feel other students stopping to watch, sensing the tension building like the pressure before a storm. Derek stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate, just welcoming the new student, making sure she understands how things work around here. His tone suggested that how things work involved her staying quiet and out of his way. But Maya Johnson wasn't the kind of person who stayed quiet, and she definitely wasn't the type to be intimidated by a spoiled rich kid with boundary issues. She held his gaze steadily, her dark eyes revealing nothing of the calculations running through her mind. "I appreciate the welcome," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure I'll figure out exactly how things work around here very quickly." Something in her tone made Derek's smirk falter for just a moment, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of his audience. As the bell rang and students began dispersing to their classes, he leaned in close enough that only Maya could hear his next words. "We'll see about that, scholarship girl." And as Maya watched him swagger away, she knew with absolute certainty that Derek Mitchell was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Chapter 2. The Confrontation. The confrontation everyone had been unconsciously waiting for finally erupted on a Thursday afternoon in the East Hallway, right by the trophy case that showcased 20 years of Riverside High's athletic dominance. Maya had stayed late to meet with her calculus teacher about advanced placement options when she found herself alone in the corridor, the usual after-school crowd having already dispersed to their various activities. Derek had been waiting. "Going somewhere, scholarship girl?" His voice echoed off the empty hallway walls as he stepped out from behind a bank of lockers, effectively blocking her path to the main exit. This time, he didn't have his usual audience of sycophants. This was personal, and he wanted privacy for whatever he had planned. Maya stopped walking but didn't step back. Military families learned early that showing fear to a bully was like showing blood to a shark. "My name is Maya," she said evenly. "And yes, I'm going home, excuse me." She moved to walk around him, but Derek shifted to block her path again, his 6'2" frame suddenly seeming more menacing in the empty hallway. "See, that's the problem with your kind," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of casual racism that had probably never been challenged in his privileged little world. "No respect for the natural order of things. You think you can just waltz in here and act like you belong." "My kind?" Maya's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "And what kind would that be, Derek?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the lingering scent of protein powder. The kind that doesn't know their place. The kind that needs to be reminded about how things really work when the teachers aren't watching. Derek reached out to grab her arm, probably intending to push her against the lockers in some pathetic display of dominance. It was the kind of move that had probably worked on every other student he'd ever intimidated. A simple physical assertion that reminded his victims just how powerless they really were. But Derek Mitchell had made a critical error in judgment. The moment his fingers made contact with Maya's arm, her body moved with a speed and precision that caught him completely off guard. Her right hand shot up and grabbed his wrist, while simultaneously pivoting her body to the side. In one fluid motion that took less than 2 seconds, she used his own momentum and weight against him, executing a perfect hip throw that sent all 6.2 of Derek Mitchell crashing to the floor with a sound that echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Derek hit the linoleum hard, his varsity jacket making that distinctive slapping sound that would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment he could only lie there gasping like a fish out of water, his perfectly styled hair now a disheveled mess, and his face flushed with shock and humiliation. Maya stood over him, not even breathing hard, her backpack still perfectly positioned on her shoulder as if she'd done nothing more strenuous than pick up a dropped pencil. "The next time you put your hands on someone without permission," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made Derek's blood run cold, "make sure you're prepared for the consequences." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from around the corner, other students who had heard the commotion and were coming to investigate. Derek scrambled to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment as he tried to straighten his jacket and salvage some semblance of dignity. "This isn't over," he hissed, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his shaken confidence. Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same detached interest a scientist might show when observing an interesting but ultimately harmless specimen. "Yes, it is," she said simply, and then walked around his still trembling form toward the exit. As she pushed through the doors into the afternoon sunlight, Maya could hear the excited whispers starting behind her. By tomorrow morning, every student at Riverside High would know that Derek Mitchell, the untouchable king of their social hierarchy, had been laid flat by the new girl who wasn't supposed to fight back. Chapter 3. Revelations. By Monday morning, the story had grown legs and sprinted through every social circle at Riverside High. Maya Johnson had become a legend overnight, though she seemed completely unaffected by her newfound notoriety as she navigated the hallways with the same quiet confidence she'd always possessed. "I heard she used some kind of ninja move," whispered Jennifer Torres to her lunch table companions. "My cousin saw Derek limping all weekend." "My brother said she's probably in some kind of gang," added Marcus Webb, though he lowered his voice when Maya walked past their table in the cafeteria. The truth, as Sarah Chen discovered when she finally worked up the courage to ask, was both simpler and more impressive than any of the rumors circulating through the school's gossip network. "My dad's a career military man," Maya explained, as they sat together in the art room during lunch, Sarah's paintbrush frozen mid-stroke as she listened. "Sergeant First Class Johnson, 22 years of service, We've moved around so much that I've basically grown up on military bases around the world. Sarah set down her brush completely. That explains the confidence, but how did you know how to take down someone twice my size? Maya smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression Sarah had seen from her since she arrived. Dad insisted I learn self-defense when I was 8, after we were stationed in Germany, and some older kids at the base school decided the new American girl needed to be put in her place. He said I'd never know when I might need to protect myself, especially as we moved from place to place. The pieces were falling into place. Maya had spent years training in various martial arts, not as some exotic hobby, but as a practical necessity for a military kid who never knew what kind of environment she'd be dropped into next. Her father had made sure she could handle herself, whether she was dealing with playground bullies in elementary school or more serious threats as she got older. Derek had no idea what he was dealing with, Maya continued, pulling out her phone to show Sarah a photo of herself in a martial arts uniform, holding a black belt certificate. 3 years of Krav Maga, 2 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a lifetime of learning that bullies only understand one language. Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell was discovering that his world had shifted dramatically off its axis. For the first time in his privileged life, he was the subject of whispers and stares, and not the kind he was used to. Students who had previously stepped aside when he walked down the hallway now watched him with barely concealed amusement. Teachers who had always treated him with the special deference reserved for school board members' children seemed to be looking at him differently. "Maybe you should just let it go," suggested his best friend Jake Morrison, as they sat in Derek's BMW after school, watching other students stream past them toward the bus lines. "I mean, it's just one girl, and honestly, the way you grabbed her arm was kind of..." "Kind of what?" Derek snapped, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Kind of exactly what my sister says guys shouldn't do," Jake finished quietly. "Maybe she had a right to defend herself." Derek stared at his friend in shock. Jake had been his loyal sidekick since middle school, always ready to laugh at his jokes and back up his version of events. This sudden display of independent thinking felt like another betrayal in a week full of humiliations. But it wasn't just Jake. Over the past few days, Derek had noticed other changes in the social dynamics around him. Students who had previously laughed at his cruel jokes now seemed uncomfortable when he made them. Girls who had once giggled at his attention now gave him a wide berth in the hallways. Even his teachers seemed less impressed by his family connections and more focused on his actual behavior and academic performance. The incident with Maya had done more than just knock him to the floor. It had shattered the illusion of invincibility that had protected him from real consequences his entire life. For the first time, Derek Mitchell was being forced to confront the reality that his actions had reactions, and not everyone in the world was going to tolerate his behavior just because his last name was on a building. As Maya had predicted, it was over. But the real question was what Derek would choose to build from the ruins of his old life. Chapter 4. Transformation. 3 weeks after the hallway incident, Derek Mitchell sat in Principal Roberts' office for what he desperately hoped would be the last time that semester. The conversation wasn't going the way he'd expected. "I want to be clear about something, Derek," Principal Roberts said, leaning back in her chair with the expression that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "The only reason you're not facing suspension or criminal charges is because Miss Johnson chose not to file a complaint. She told me, and I quote, 'Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes.'" Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd spent the past 3 weeks replaying that moment in the hallway, and each time the memory became more mortifying. Not just because he'd been physically overpowered by someone smaller than him, but because he was finally beginning to understand how his behavior must have looked to everyone else. "She could have destroyed your college prospects with a single report," Principal Roberts continued. "Instead, she's giving you an opportunity to prove that you're capable of growth. I suggest you don't waste it." That afternoon, Derek found Maya in the library, sitting alone at a corner table with her calculus textbook spread open in front of her. It took him nearly 10 minutes to work up the courage to approach her table, and when he did, his usual swagger was nowhere to be found. Can I sit down?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked up from her homework, studied his face for a moment, then nodded toward the empty chair across from her. "Sure." Derek sat down heavily, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "Not just for grabbing you, but for everything. The comments, the attitude, all of it. It was wrong." "Yes, it was," Maya agreed, not making it easy for him, but not being cruel either. "I've been thinking about what you said, about consequences," Derek continued, the words coming out in a rush. I think I've never really faced any real consequences before. My parents, the school, everyone just let me get away with being awful because of who my family is. Maya closed her textbook and gave him her full attention. So what are you going to do about it? It was a simple question, but Derek realized it was the first time anyone had ever asked him to take responsibility for his own behavior, rather than just apologizing for it. I don't know, he admitted. I mean, I want to be better, but I don't really know how. This is going to sound pathetic, but I think being a bully was the only way I knew how to feel important. It does sound pathetic, Maya said bluntly, but there was no malice in her voice. But at least you're being honest about it. Over the following months, Derek Mitchell slowly began the difficult work of rebuilding his reputation and, more importantly, his character. It wasn't easy. Years of entitlement don't disappear overnight, and he stumbled frequently. But Maya, surprising everyone including herself, became an unlikely mentor in the process. She helped him understand the impact his words had on other students, challenged him when he fell back into old patterns, and gradually showed him that real confidence came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. It wasn't friendship exactly. There was too much history for that, but it was something more valuable: mutual respect. By senior year, Derek had become the kind of person who used his family's influence to advocate for anti-bullying programs rather than to escape consequences for his own behavior. He never forgot the sound his varsity jacket made when it hit the floor that day, but now he remembered it as the moment his real life began. Maya Johnson graduated as valedictorian and went on to West Point, following in her father's footsteps but blazing her own trail. She occasionally received updates about her old classmates through social media, and she was genuinely proud to see Derek thriving as a social worker, using his experience with privilege and power to help other young people find better paths. Sometimes, the most important lessons come not from teachers or textbooks, but from the moments when someone refuses to let us get away with being less than our best selves. Derek Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way on a Thursday afternoon in an empty hallway, when a 5'4" girl showed him that real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about having the courage to grow. And Maya Johnson? She learned that sometimes the best way to change the world is one person at a time, starting with the one brave enough to admit they need to change.